harm you. That's crazy. So maybe it's in the exhibits, or maybe it's going to come out if it's true in Discovery. That's fucking nuts, right? This turns it into like a fucking Netflix documentary and not just like a video game development that went wrong. So unless Sharif signed documents granting Dawson greater and greater amounts of equity and control, this is what he is being alleged that was being said. We'll harm you unless you give us more equity and control. We'll not pay the employees. We'll sue you. We'll do X, Y, and Z unless you give us more control of the company. And here's a specific example, which would be crazy to put in a lawsuit if you don't have evidence of this. But obviously we're not going to see the evidence, I don't think, at least until Discovery. In just one example, Dawson demanded a warrant granting him 10% of the company for $10. Yeah, okay. In other instances, Dawson demanded zero-cost, non-dilutable equity options in his convertible debt notes. Sharif and the then board acquiesced to Dawson's demands because they believed Dawson would make good on his threats, and refusing would result in imminent catastrophe for the employees and the company. Dawson also required Sharif to involve him in all discussions with company counsel, despite his outsider status, and even falsely represented that he was an agent of the company to retain company counsel. I might be wrong here, but what this means is that he was basically saying you can't talk to a lawyer unless I'm there, and I will also be saying I represent the company while you're talking to a lawyer. As a result of the direct, intentional, and mounting pressure, plaintiff suffered an extreme health crisis, including a hypertensive emergency and acute kidney failure, hospitalization and vision loss from blood pressure complications, including macular edema. Don't know what that is, but the claim here is that due to all of this that was going on, Stephen was hospitalized with kidney failure and hypertension that caused him to lose his partial vision. Plaintiff suffers long-term impairment from his health issues he experienced during this period. Dawson was privy to plaintiff's health issues at the time and is well aware of the long-term impacts plaintiff suffered. Now we're at the fucking Stephen files section here where there's a bunch of redacted stuff. This is court sealed. We're not going to see this. Presumably this is some private confidential agreement between the two parties being Stephen and this board, which are Dawson, Bartels, Teresa, Ryan Ogden, etc. Dawson also insisted on revising the company's corporate governance documents and shareholder agreements. On May 16, 2024, company shareholders entered into the shareholders agreement. Under the shareholder agreement, plaintiff expressly retained full creative control of the company. So they're saying that even under this agreement, Stephen Sharif maintained full creative control of the company, but that he didn't own the company. So he was in charge of the creative direction, and Dawson and other people were in charge of, they owned the company, basically, is what this is saying. After this event that happened, this thing, which again I'm going to assume is some kind of settlement behind closed doors, Dawson gained both de jure and de facto control of the company finances and governance. He was not only the majority shareholder, also remained the primary provider of crucial debt financing. He leveraged his newly acquired power over Sharif and his team of employees by continuing to routinely threaten to withhold funds, especially just before bi-weekly payroll deadlines, to extract concessions. For example, based on the threat of withholding payroll funds, he forced Moore to resign from the board and transfer his equity to Sharif. Dawson and his deputies also frequently threatened to harm Stephen and his loved one physically if Stephen did not comply with his demands. This is fucking crazy. I mean, I did say this was going to be a crazy story, and once people saw the allegations on both sides, it was going to be an absolutely fucking nuclear fallout. Because if there is evidence of this that comes up in court, my God, this is crazy. On May 13th, 2024, Dawson securitized his debt against all assets and all personal property of the company, including intellectual property, which includes the trade secret materials, aka basically the game. Dawson lien financing statement attached here to is Exhibit B. We'll go over that at the end, I guess. Lenders that hold senior priority positions to Dawson are the Small Business Administration and Commerce West Bank, whose loan is also collateralized by all assets and personal property of the company, including intellectual property, which includes trade secret materials. And that is also attached to this, so we can go over it to see who actually is the person who, on paper, is owed the money. Right, if you're going to roll up the company, you have to pay out the people who were owed stuff from within the company need to be privy to and involved in this process because they're owed stuff. You can't just say, oh, I'm owed, and jump the queue and just take everything, which is what this is alleging they tried to do. Dawson knew or should have known of these senior liens because they are publicly available. I mean, yeah, you can literally look this up in 5 minutes yourself. As majority shareholder, Dawson voted himself and his close business associate Ryan Ogden onto the board of directors during a September 4th, 2024 board meeting. The board appointed Dawson as chairman of the board and Ogden as CFO. Dawson directed Ogden to open new bank accounts for Intrepid at Pathway Bank, which is a bank over which Dawson exercises de facto and de jure control. So he controls the bank, and he got Ryan Ogden to open new accounts at the bank he controls. Sharif ceased to have any access to active company bank accounts, and he was effectively stripped of financial and other authority. So obviously in the lawsuit that was filed by TFE Holdings, which is owned by Rob Dawson, which is this person, they're claiming in that lawsuit that they didn't have control of the finances and didn't have access to the books, and Stephen was in charge of everything. And then Stephen is claiming that since September 4th of 2024, they had control of everything and even had new bank accounts and everything that they were controlling. And obviously Jason has also claimed publicly that they didn't have access to stuff, but this is saying that they did. So again, we're going to have to wait and see document-wise who's correct on this one, because both sides are saying a completely polar opposite thing to each other. By August 2025, Dawson elected his close associates Teresa and a substantial company creditor, and Aaron Bartels to the board. Thus, from that time until Sharif's January 19, 2026 resignation from the company, the board consisted of Dawson, Ogden, Fett, Bartels, and Sharif. All these people acted at the behest of Dawson rather than as independent board members, and they continually voted in alignment with him. Dawson frequently insisted that Sharif not publicize Dawson's role within the company. So this is saying people's biggest criticism and complaint of this whole situation is Stephen always said the company was only financed by him. He was the only person involved. There was no, corporate overlords or whatever. And obviously the text messages from Jason show that even from the very beginning, there was other people putting money into the company. But then people have also said, reasonably so, why when a board was created and these other people gained control of the company, did you not let people know that this was the case? Because that would have informed people's purchasing decisions. And this is where a lot of the allegations of, oh, it's a scam came from. And what this lawsuit is saying, at least on the face of it, is that Dawson was the one who now owned the company that was saying, do not talk about my role within the company. Ogden, too, did not wish for his identity and role to be revealed publicly. Sharif was under no express obligation to hide Dawson or Ogden's roles and identities, but Sharif complied out of fear of reprisals, and he continued to act as the external face of the company. So that's the claim. Obviously, we're going to need to see documentation of this, as with fucking everything claimed in all these lawsuits. On October 15, 2025, Sharif notified the board that he would take a temporary medical leave relating to the medical issues he'd suffered in 2024. He then advised the board that he would be stepping back from his role as CEO and board member, but that he would continue as he was able as creative director. Intrepid partners with Valve. Okay, so this is the Valve section and how this all plays out. So in around September 25, the board, against Stephen, Sharif, and senior leadership's advice, directed that Intrepid undertake an early access launch of Ashes of Creation in Okay, so when I saw the announcement of the game is coming to Steam, my immediate reaction, obviously I'd been aware at the time before the public announcement, because I'd been contacted by somebody with internal knowledge to the company and informed right when the employees were informed that this game was going to Steam. My immediate reaction was, there's something massive going on behind the scenes. Either there's no money or somebody's exerting control to get this game pushed out into the public to begin making money with the game, to reduce operating costs, to do whatever. It's a financially motivated decision. This was blatantly obvious from, if you know anything about the company, and optically it looks bad. You can spin it whatever way you want, but if a game is saying we have loads of money, it's fine, don't worry about it, and then the game goes to then say, oh, we're launching in early access on Steam, there's only one factor for doing that, and it's financially driven. What this is saying is that the board forced this decision against the judgment of all the people involved, such as Stephen. The early access launched on December 2011, 2025. Steam is a worldwide platform. We know what Steam is. We don't have to. Ogden specifically assured Commerce West Bank that the revenue owing to the company from Valve under the revenue share agreement related to the Steam early access launch would cover outstanding obligation of the Commerce West Bank loan. Okay, so this is... For context, if you're following along with this still, obviously this is going to be a long one, right? We're a third of the way through this document. It'll speed up a little bit. So obviously the public narrative right now, because of what Jason Karamanis has said on live streams, etc., which has then been repeated by a bunch of mainstream game outlets and things like that, is that Stephen went to the bank without the board's knowledge and did this as some kind of ploy to unlock equity in his house or something, right? But this is alleging that Ogden specifically spoke to the bank and said the money that's coming in from the Steam sales from the bank will be covering our obligation to you, which was millions of dollars of a bank loan that everybody in the company knew was pending, right? Everybody knew this needed to be paid in December of 2025 because it had been there since 2020 and these people had been involved in the company for years by the point of 2025. So if true, this is obviously a very easily provable point, right? There's going to be communications between Ogden and the bank that will be able to come up in discovery. So we'll see on that one, I guess. But this is a very specific claim. This is a very specific point that would be easy for either side to prove one way or another, right? Dawson, TFE, and the board execute a wrongful foreclosure in an effort to steal the company's intellectual property and trade secrets. Beginning in 2025, the board collectively devised a plan and an agreement to take possession of the company's assets via a wrongful Article 9 foreclosure process using Dawson's junior secured lien against the company. They intentionally planned to do so without providing proper and legally required notice to senior secured lenders so that they could transfer company assets to a new company created and controlled by Dawson, TFE, and wipe out equity holders and prior creditors in Intrepid. Again, a lot of people had liens against Intrepid, and what this is claiming is that they came in and just said, oh, you know, never mind, we're just gonna take control of everything, and all these other creditors, we're gonna jump ahead of them and just take the stuff, which is a wild claim to make. Then it says, of course, they believe that all the board members are likely members of TFE, which is the new company. The board defendants also intended to lay off a large portion of the Intrepid workforce without required wages, PTO, and severance, because those debts would remain with Intrepid. So the allegation is they were going to saddle all of the debt on Intrepid as an entity and then just move all the stuff that's worth money to a new entity and continue operating without having to pay back all this stuff that was owed, while bringing a portion of the employee base over to TFE to finish development of the Ashes Creation project in order to monetize it for their own personal benefit. All the employees have seen this communication, so this part is verifiably true. Dawson had indicated that he was considering executing this strategy to obtain greater control over the development project as early as 2024. Beginning in 2025 and in furtherance of their scheme, the board defendants intentionally permitted the company to accrue substantial unpaid obligations to vendors and service providers with the goal of using the debt to improperly declare a default and justify an Article 9 foreclosure on Jason's junior secured lien. So what they're saying, they stopped paying vendors, which obviously we've seen multiple lawsuits from vendors, right? We saw the lawsuit, I believe it was Google Web Services or something, right? There was a lawsuit from SADA Systems, which is a Google cloud partner.
You're okay, you don't have to leave. Kitty, you don't have to leave.
Plus dollars of unpaid fees, basically, for the services rendered to Intrepid. So this is saying that in 2025 they started intentionally not paying vendors in order to justify closing the company and taking control of the assets of the company into a new company, which is again an absolutely fucking nuts accusation to make, and a very specific one.
There we go.
Prior to the wrongful foreclosure,
oh my god.
in furtherance of their underhanded plan, Dawson directed Ogden as CFO to open bank accounts at Pathway Bank for TFE. The new company Dawson had created housed the wrongfully foreclosed upon assets. Prior to the wrongful foreclosure and to further justify declaration of default, Ogden wrongfully directed Valve to divert the deposit funds owed to the company under the partnership with Steam to a new Pathway bank account for TFE. Valve did not comply. Jesus Christ, this is such a fucking mess. Holy shit. Plaintiff first objected to the board defendants' plan during a December 15th, 2025 in-person board meeting. So this is saying Stephen was in a board meeting and said, you know, no. Specifically objected to the board causing the company to not pay vendors. to the board's plan to lay off a large portion of employees without requisite pay and benefits, and to the legality of the foreclosure. After the meeting ended and all the board members left, Dawson confronted Stephen in a physically intimidating manner and told him he, quote, didn't want any shit, and coerced him to sign between 30 and 40 signature pages to the corresponding agreements for which plaintiff was not permitted to review. This is honestly like some mafia shit. Like, if this is true, this is fucking crazy. Plaintiff next objected to the board defendant's plan to foreclose without notice to the senior secured lenders on a phone call with Dawson and Dawson's personal counsel that occurred between December 28th, 2025 and January 3rd, 2026. So right at the end, you know, just almost not even a full month before the actual fucking implosion of the company. On December 30th, 2025, in furtherance of the foreclosure scheme, Ogden, at the direction of and in concert with the other board defendants, filed a false California state information document with the California Secretary of State in order to conceal the board defendants' identities from the public during the planned foreclosure and attempted revenue diversion scheme. So you can see this. You can look this up. I pointed this out like 10-15 days ago, right? If you go to the California UCC website and you look up the company information documents, you can see that at one point Stephen Sharif was listed as CEO and John Moore was listed as CFO, and then John Moore was changed to Ryan Ogden as CFO, and then on December 30th Ryan Ogden resubmitted, and he even signed submitting saying that, you know, this is me putting the document forward, that John Moore was back as CFO. But this document's claiming that John was taken off the board forcefully by Dawson and that he was forced to sign over his shares to Sharif and was no longer the CFO. So this is accusations of filing a knowingly false California State of Information document with California Secretary of State to conceal the identities from the public during the time where they are also alleging that the company was being, you know, wrongfully rolled up with all this debt being saddled onto Intrepid to make this new company, which they're claiming is a revenue diversion scheme. The statement of information listed plaintiff as the sole director of the company, intentionally omitting Dawson, Ogden, Fett, and Bartels. Because if you go on that document, it literally says all board members have to be on this document. But then it's obviously filed, and at this point, there is a board, and they're not put on there, right? So this is what it's saying, and you can see these documents yourself. It further misidentified the company's CFO as Moore, despite the fact Ogden had been duly appointed CFO since September 2024. Again, this is a really easy point to prove or disprove.
Good kitty.
If you just have company minutes, which
I
how
killed
board
him.
meetings
Oh
work
my
is
God,
everyone's
I
in a
killed
room
him.
and you have to say, oh, this person nominates this person for this position, and then other people have to agree. They have to vote on it. That's literally how board meetings work. And board meetings presumably have minutes, and then obviously presumably there will also be emails and things. So making a claim this specific with public filings also there to show it is absolutely crazy if you do not have the evidence that this happened. So presumably this is gonna, somebody's gonna prove this or disprove it very, very easily because they'll have the minutes of the meetings. Ogden, in concert with the other board defendants, filed the false California Statement Act in an effort to direct any public fallout from their conduct directly to Sharif. The board defendants did so despite actual knowledge of Sharif's fragile medical condition, and also knowledge that the gaming community would likely wrongly blame and eviscerate Sharif as the only publicly identified director should Intrepid and Ash's Creation endeavor fail or be involved in controversy. I mean, he was gonna be anyway, because he made claims from the very beginning that it was only him involved. So obviously, even if you then later on say, oh, here's all these other people that are involved, people are going to be like, why did this happen? Why did you make these claims originally? But obviously this is considerably worse. If the entire time I was making videos about this originally, everyone was like, there was no board, clearly there was no board. And then you find out, yes, in fact there was a board, but we've moved past the point of that being a controversy and moved straight onto who is directly responsible for each point of this failure. And so far, all of the public information we've had has come from Rob's lawsuit and Jason's text messages from, 2015 to 2021. And that's all we've had, so this is obviously all new public information. In advance of the wrongful foreclosure and in furtherance of the board defendants' scheme to steal the company's intellectual property and trade secrets, Ogden prepared a company asset list on December 31st, 2025. That list specifically references components of Ash's creation that comprise the company's intellectual property and trade secret materials. The list references Ash's creation code base, game content, text, narrative, sound, etc., customized gameplay, audio effects, visual effects, all the special effects. Also includes a list titled from ChatGPT, of course, that includes software and game code, game engine and technical frameworks, game systems and trade secrets, and creative content and copyrighted works. Sharif embarked on a campaign to convince the board to abandon its foreclosure scheme. So what Stephen said publicly was, I resigned because I couldn't agree with the board and what they were doing. And obviously this lawsuit is now alleging that what they were doing was these things that we've been going over in this lawsuit. But also one of the things that he said was that it was because he couldn't agree with what they were doing with the employees, which was to fire a bunch of people without paying them what they were owed, which has obviously been a huge point of contention, because Jason's public testimony of what he's been saying is that Stephen actually was saying to the board, I want equity, I want these things to personally enrich myself, and if I don't get them, I'm gonna, you know, resign and fuck up the whole company. So this is a direct contradiction to that, although not mentioning that. So maybe there's a factor here that somebody's eventually going to show in some form of provable communication. But what he's saying is he tried to convince them to stop the foreclosure scheme in specific. At every board meeting between January 3rd and his January 19, 2026 resignation, estimated to be between 10 and 15 times, he objected to the board defendants' plan to wrongfully foreclose on Dawson's junior secured lien without notice to secured lenders, to the board defendants' attempt to divert funds from the Steam partnership to the company TFE, and to the board defendants' plan to terminate a large portion of Intrepid's employee base without compensating PTO and severance. Again, presumably this will be, if true, in the minutes. There is an exhibit mentioned here, so I wonder what that is. On January 7th, 2026, in advance of the wrongful foreclosure and in furtherance of the board defendants' scheme to steal the company's intellectual property and trade secrets, Dawson changed the secured party on his secured party financing statement from himself to TFE, which is also attached, interestingly. On January 14th, Dawson, in concert with the board of defendants, represented to investors that the company had secured the necessary capital commitments to make it to September 2026 launch. During this meeting, Dawson revealed the foreclosure scheme and his intent to wipe the investor and lender table clean. On January 15th, Sharif blew the whistle on defendants' foreclosure plan to Commerce West Bank, whom defendants had intentionally failed to notify of the foreclosure. Prompted by this information, Commerce West Bank issued an event of default letter on January 18, 2026, demanding immediate and full repayment from either the company or the personal guarantor of the loan, Moore. And obviously you can see from the other lawsuit, right, that this is a little bit contradictory in terms of what was filed against Stephen regarding the whole Steam situation. Because in this lawsuit specifically, it states that they're claiming that Steam notified Stephen Sharif on January 18th and he didn't share it with the company. But then in this lawsuit, he's claiming that the bank actually contacted the company, which would be a crazy thing to lie about because it's a fucking bank on a federally secured loan. So this is a crazy point based on that, because they're saying here that a bank contacted the company, so they did know about the fact that this was happening, that they owed this money. On January 16th, Dawson caused Intrepid to declare default on the one hand, and he caused TFE to foreclose on the company's assets on the other hand. Dawson caused TFE to engage in a non-judicial disposition in favour instead of a private sale. Dawson, TFE, and the board defendants failed to advertise the...
What?! Oh my god. What? Hi, beautiful kitty. How are you doing?
the sale in industry standard publications or platforms. They did not involve a broker or auctioneer and did not publish any marketing of the sale in any manner. The intellectual property and trade secrets of an MMORPG are not customarily sold on a recognized market. With Dawson, TFE and the board, defendants pursued a self-serving private sale anyway. TFE obtained Intrepid's assets via a self-interested transaction between Dawson, who controlled Intrepid on the one hand, and Dawson, who controlled TFE on the other hand. This self-interested transaction was completed at the specific design of Dawson and the board defendants, who blessed the sale for their own personal profits. This foreclosure approximately and directly caused Intrepid harm in the form of the loss of its most valuable assets, aka the game. The only asset the company had is the game. Dawson and the board members executed their agreement over Sharif's objections and in violation of the rights of senior secured creditors and derivative plaintiffs, the bank. Dawson performed the foreclosure in an intentional clandestine manner, and he specifically ignored his counsel's advice that Dawson must provide notice to senior secured credits, including Commerce West Bank. This is fucking nuts. Immediately thereafter, on January 19, 2026, Sharif resigned from the company, and as a member of the board, in his resignation letter, he specifically identified his reasons for resignation, among others, as 1. His disagreement with the board's repeated attempts to terminate employees without payment of wages and compensation legally owed to them, which is also a thing he said publicly. 2. His disagreement with the private foreclosure, given his serious concerns the approach raised regarding fiduciary duties owed to derivative plaintiffs, creditors, employees, and the company.
But they're software developers. They stole all that money.
Threats, coercion, and ultimatums to execute documents and actions that he openly and consistently protested. F. Dawson and the board illegally separate Intrepid's entire workforce and leave plaintiff to suffer the fallout. This is going over the WARN Act, right? Which obviously the employees, they're the ones that have been the most fucked by this, and they've also got their own lawsuit against Intrepid for money that they are legally owed. On or about January 31st, the board defendants caused Intrepid to issue WARN Act notices without the required notice period, which is 60 days. The board defendants took this action upon learning that the Commerce West Bank had learned of the wrongful foreclosure and had contacted Valve to intercept the funds due to Intrepid from the Steam partnership, meaning the board defendants could no longer access that money to fund TFE's ramp-up. So the narrative so far has been that Stephen snaked the money from Valve for personal gain. But as far as I understand it, and as this is claiming, you have to notify the bank, the secured creditor, that this thing was going on, that they were going to roll up the company with the Article 9 foreclosure and move assets into a new company, because they're a secured creditor and it's federal money. This is a federally backed loan. So
there's 3 guys here.
What he's saying in this lawsuit, which again is a crazy claim to make, because this, in my mind, would be immediately illegal, at least from my understanding, is that you have a responsibility to inform the bank, otherwise you're party to what you believe is a crime, right? Because if you're saying this, they're going to take the money that's owed to the bank, that the bank has said we're owed this money, and he said earlier in this lawsuit that Ryan Ogden personally, as CFO, assured the bank that they would be getting the money from the Steam funds, and then he's saying that they were going to take those Steam funds, not inform the bank, and put them into the new company. Then his position, he's claiming, is that he had to tell the bank, otherwise he would be party to something that he believes to have been wrongful and potentially a criminal action, because if he wouldn't have told the bank, he would have been essentially in on the fact that they were taking this money that everybody was knew was owed to the bank. That's the claim, right? This is a fucking insane thing to, 1, happen, and 2, to make claims of if you don't have evidence of. Like, this is an insane thing to say. And if not, the bank is going to be saying, why the fuck are you saying this in a lawsuit when this didn't happen with money that is the US government's? That's a really stupid thing to do if you don't have the evidence that this actually happened. The corporate unrest following by the mass layoffs generated significant agitation in the online gaming community. That's a real understatement, yeah. However, Dawson and the board defendants have intentionally hidden behind the guise of anonymity. It was no error that Ogden filed a blatantly false statement of information with California Secretary of State identifying only Sharif and Moore as company directors and or officers. Rather, it was a calculated action intended to shield the board from the fallout of their actions and wrongfully place the public blame on Sharif. The fallout for Sharif has been swift and devastating. The public has wrongfully the downfall of Intrepid, accused Sharif of illegal wrongdoing and called Sharif a liar. Sharif has received death threats, and both Sharif and his family fear constantly for their physical safety. The board defendants specifically discussed during a January 30th, 2026 board meeting with multiple witnesses present,
I was distracted.
using this online campaign to frame Sharif for the company's collapse. They would let Sharif take the fall and emerge as White Knights in a few months with plans to revive the game beloved by millions. I mean, whether this is true, this is exactly what's happened. So, if there is a meeting where this happened and there is witnesses that are going to go on record that this happened, the fallout is exactly what this states. So again, another crazy thing to claim if you don't have evidence of it. But this is exactly what happened. Everyone does believe these things, and everyone does believe the board is like in the right. To the same end, the board defendants have piled onto this false narrative by making false allegations that Sharif misled creditors and investors the game development milestone and completion dates. That Sharif misrepresented the nature of his relationship with business partners and plaintiff and more misappropriated company funds. This is what has been claimed by both Jason and the TFE lawsuit. On information and belief, the board of defendants have taken the further step of distributing defamatory materials, including false statements of criminal wrongdoing about Sharif to members of the gaming public for public dissemination. At all times, Sharif appropriately caveated to potential lenders that any estimated timeframes with respect to Ash's development milestones of completion were just estimates, subject to a number of variables outside of his control. Game development is an iterative process. At all times, Sharif appropriately caveated that relationships could increase the value of the game, e.g. publishing deals were speculative and not guaranteed. At no time did Sharif intentionally misappropriate funds from the company. In public statements to the contrary are intended to invoke public outrage and outcry against Sharif to shield the defendants from the fallout of their wrongful actions described herein. So here we go. Valve freezes revenues. My God, we're halfway through this. Oh my God, this
oh my
God
God,
long. It's already an hour. On February 3rd, 2026, Valve terminated Intrepid's partnership with Steam. So this is news, right? We knew they'd removed the buy button from the game. We didn't know that they'd terminated any kind of partnership. Valve cited as reasons for the termination that it received multiple conflicting requests from alleged account administrators for Intrepid, requesting authority to change Intrepid's banking information without response to Valve's follow-up requests seeking to confirm the validity of the requests. The Valve has received demands from multiple potential creditors for Intrepid's revenues, and the Valve is receiving a large number of refund requests from players who purchased the early access to the game. So, basically, everybody was saying, we're owed this money, transfer this money here, the game's a fraud, the game's a scam, give us our money back from the player base. And Valve turned around and went, what the fuck is going on here? And just froze everything so that they could figure out who is actually owed the money. Are they going to have to refund everybody? You know, what is actually going on, which we knew happened, but obviously not all the details of this. Before the issue of refunds, Intrepid would have been entitled to approximately $5 million, thus demonstrating the value of, among other things, the trade secret materials, aka the video game. Defendants continued to plan to imminently steal the company's intellectual property and trade secrets. TFE and the board defendants are currently actively soliciting former employees and the director of IT, the former director of IT, including with offers of compensation, to provide them access to Ashes of Creation along with its intellectual property and trade secret material components, and 2, attempting to sell Ashes of Creation along with its intellectual property and trade secret material components, the lifeblood of the company, and key to the value of shares owned by Sharif and the derivative shareholders, to competitor game developers in order to recoup their own investments. So this, according to the allegations, is the new plan, is to just sell the game, get access to the game from the employees who they fired and didn't pay, so that they can sell the game to somebody. The defendants' actions are in furtherance of the agreement between the board members to appropriate the company's intellectual property and trade secrets. Defendants' actions have already harmed the company, and they continue to pose irreparable and imminent harm to the company. And then there's all the claims for relief, right? I'm not going to go and read these because this is just saying what they want.
Steven Sharif, he was a crooked software developer. They're all crooked software developers. When you think about software, what do you think? I'll tell you what I think. I think a piece of code that they use some crazy database to make, then they sell you their software key to that piece of code. And then you have a $60 key to their content. That's very gray area. Almost all of it is gray area, and software developers constantly use this against us.
Now we can go through the exhibits. It's actually not going to be as long as I thought it was going to be, because we're basically at the end. Okay, so now we have the public records that we could already look up ourselves. So this is Ryan Ogden. This is Robert Dawson's lien against the company, which is filed on the 13th of the 5th, 2024. And then this is the bank's lien, which is in 2020, right? 7/26/2020, which is showing who is owed the money. This is the Small Business Administration loan. This is then the federally backed loan, the Commerce West Bank loan that's for millions of dollars that they're claiming that they tried to circumvent. Then this is also on the 7th of January 2026, Robert Dawson changing his lien from himself to the new company that he spun up. I can't show some of these sections, these documents, because they show people's addresses, and that will just get the video immediately privacy striked. So, yeah, there we go. This is fucking nuts. I mean, I told you it was going to be nuts.
Yeah, I believe them. I believe them.
Of course. And as more and more people come forward with more and more lawsuits, it's going to get more nuts.
Oh, Kitty, you can
because
come
this
back.
is obviously not everything. This
back.
is the first time we're seeing the other side of the table's allegations and what they're claiming. This is, at least from what I can tell, a pretty specific lawsuit. It has a lot of dates, has a lot of specific claims. Yep. But obviously, as I said in the Nevada lawsuit, there's no evidence attached to this, of course, because there isn't going to be at this stage. So we have to take everything from all of these lawsuits and all of the claims being made publicly with a pinch of salt, because we don't have the records to see them. But at least now we have another side of the story. And if any of this turns out to be true, if we do see documents of like threats, witness testimony of, planning to do these things, minutes.
The software developers are getting worse. The politicians are getting worse. They keep stealing. They've got problems. They're stealing the whole kitty, like the whole shebang. They're like taking the whole cut and just running with it. And we don't know what to do about that. I don't know any software developers that I trust. I trust Steam. I trust Epic. I trust GOG.
Claiming that they were, changing who was involved in the company.
They've always protected me as a corporate entity. They've never harmed me.
Publicly and misfiling records on purpose and things. That paints an incredibly different picture to what we've been led to believe from other claims. Either way, this is a fucking insane... I said this was going to be like the biggest gaming drama of recent years. And you're getting that. Does again, at the end of every Kickstarter...
It's like one of the software developers finally got caught, like, red-handed. And it's going to be crazy for the rest of the industry. Because they're all like this. When one of them gets busted, the rest of them will all fall in line. It's going to be crazy.
MMORPG Rainbow.
But yeah, when I think of criminals, I don't think of like mafia or pimps or drug dealers or prostitutes. I think of software developers and white-collar crime, frankly.
There is this. Usually not as crazy as this. A lot of the times it's like nobody ever talks, there's no lawsuits. Maybe there's a class action suit in, say, Chronicles of Valeria's case, where nothing publicly ever comes of it. This is crazy. But there we go. Thanks for watching, as always. Hopefully you enjoyed. Let me know if you managed to get through.
I did. This was so good. Never thought I would get so much enjoyment out of this game for free. I really liked your comment and was inspired by it. Thank you.
PvP in the courts. If a bunch of scammers fuck each other in the woods, does it make a sound? Does it ever matter? Full loot. Full loot was quite funny. Another reminder that Steve stole vitamin juice as a cure to cancer patients. An MLM scheme. These software developers, I really don't like them. I really don't. Okay, guys, I'm going to bed. I love you. I will see you tomorrow. I'm going to stop this video here with a reminder that you've been watching Skycat Live. I'm a full-time variety gamer all day, every day. Put me on in the background. Click on the cast face to donate. Come to the Twitch or the YouTube or the Kick and give me a like, sub, or a follow. I have many thousands of videos on my YouTube channel. I'm about to add 4 more. This entire session was recorded, and I will post it to my channel. And thank you so much for hanging out with me on a Wednesday night, 2:30 in the motherfucking morning. Here we go. I am breaking out now. I'm going to stop. And here we go. But I want to come to YouTube and create. There we go. And now I'm going to title my video. Bye.